Sometimes I feel a bit like Steve Irwin when I watch them now. Remember when he was like, go around and talk about observing animals in their natural habitat? That's what I feel like when I watch the Gen Z on social media.
Can you do the accent?
I will not embarrass myself doing
Disappointing.
that. Good try, though. This is ClimateTech with Kentaro, a podcast featuring the brightest minds and most influential voices in climate tech. I'm your host, Kentaro Kawamori. We've shared some pretty incredible solutions to the climate challenge on our podcast, from NCX to Nevada and rare earth recycling. At the same time, we've talked about fascinating investment activities from VC funds like Footprint Coalition Ventures and Clear Vision Ventures. In this episode, I think we did a bit of zooming out, and I thought it was only a matter of time until we talked about systems change and why all these climate solutions and players are part of a much bigger puzzle. Today, I've got the distinct pleasure of chatting with not one but two incredibly smart and accomplished people, SYSTEMIQ Capital's Irena Spazzapan and Georgina Fleming. Irena is a partner, while Georgina is a junior partner at the firm. SYSTEMIQ Capital backs climate tech entrepreneurs in 4 distinct areas, which they'll dive into in just a bit. Also worth noting that this interview reminded me of those 2010 Apple commercials. Georgina and Irena talked to me while they were in the same room, in London, beside each other, while both sharing a pair of headphones. We hear the word spin out a lot, but you don't hear spin out from McKinsey a ton. So how do you go from McKinsey to spin out to McKinsey, which is, really strategy consulting, and then there's an investment arm within that, and then I think now we're on spin out number 2, because now you're breaking apart the investment piece. And tell us about all that.
We are the 4th spin out from SYSTEMIQ, right? So
wow,
SYSTEMIQ
okay.
is
So I was 50% off. SYSTEMIQ Capital is a spin-off from SYSTEMIQ, a systems change company that partners with businesses, policymakers, and civil society to make economic systems sustainable. In turn, SYSTEMIQ was a spin-off from management consulting firm McKinsey. SYSTEMIQ was launched a few months after the Paris Agreement was signed. As you may or may not know, the Paris Agreement, also known as the Paris Accords, is a legally binding international treaty on climate change that was adopted in 2015 at the behest of the UN. And without getting too technical, the goal of the agreement is to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius by 2050.
I think the vision really comes from this idea that if we want to get to a 1.5 degree world, you won't get there unless you get all these different constituents to work together, right? Whether it's corporates, investors, NGOs, tech disruptors, academics, corporates. And SYSTEMIQ does work with all of these, right? With people who specialize in their little bit, and then share internally and very much sort of plug the various opportunities with each other so people learn from each other. And, we constantly feed the innovation side of things to the consultants, and they feed their networks to our portfolio companies. And so the two sort of feed off each other, which is what we call system change.
So it's almost like the much, much earlier version of what CVCs try to do when it's too late most of the time. By the way, CVC means corporate venture capital. And they're trying to force innovation into the business model sort of as an afterthought. So you all looked at it from the beginning and you said, we should do this just on inception, is what it sounds like.
Well, because we are in the early days of the transition, right? Which is the reason why, for example, we don't invest in power, electricity. I always say, this is my background, but the transition there, the path is there. You just have to bring in the trillions and execute. It's an infrastructure play. Pretty much everything else in the climate world, it's very early stage, right? And we need new technologies, but we also need a lot of oil software that, blends it all together and enables the right decisions to be taken. And that's still a new world. So there isn't much for the, late stage guys to do yet.
Well, I like how calm and coolly you said we just have to bring in the trillions, like it was just the normal thing that you do. So you're right, obviously. There has to be trillions of capital allocated and moved here. So I love the thesis, but let's bring it back one step. You've used the words or kind of the phrase systems level a few times. Do you want to just help us define that for the audience and what that means for you all?
Yeah. So I think the way that SYSTEMIQ was structured is to say, look, we can't just solve the climate crisis with new policies by changing corporate incumbents' behaviors, by scaling new technologies. You really need to do all 3 and you need to do them together. And so our view of systems change is that those three nodes and everything in between really have to work in tandem in order to shift these systems. So I think there's something about systems change thinking where you have to take a step back and you need to think about the interconnectedness of the different players in the different sectors and really how these kind of work and dance together in order to shift these systems meaningfully.
That's great. So tell us a bit about the kind of formal investment thesis and, where you've been focused and maybe, how that played while you were, firmly within the systemic fold. And now as you're working on sort of becoming a more independent, capital provider and manager, has that changed? What spawned that? Great to get your sort of thesis on all that overall.
It hasn't really changed because the differentiation of SYSTEMIQ Capital is very much the networks and the deep expertise, right? The fact that we can have this multi-specialist approach, which is very hard to replicate if you're a small team in VC where you just can't sort of go deep in too many areas. So we invest across climate. And the way we explain our narrative is we invest in how food and goods are produced, how these are transported, how these are financed, and how we then deal with the externalities generated.
A quick one. Externalities refer to the cost or benefit to an unrelated third party when goods and services are produced or consumed. When it comes to negative externalities, for example, think about air pollution and how it harms those who are not the producers of polluting products.
So what it means is obviously sustainable food and materials. It's anything to do with synthetic biology and how understanding the engineering of nature will enable us, we believe, to finally get rid of petrochemicals, but also get rid of intense land use produced food, but also more chemical and alternative routes to things like cement, steel, aluminium, right? So those would be that bucket. On the transport, we spent a lot of time thinking about the so-called hard-to-abate transport. The term hard-to-abate was invented by SYSTEMIQ and the Energy Transitions Commission when we launched in 2017. And that really sort of deals with sectors that are on the transport side, so shipping, aviation, and trucking. And then on the industrial side, steel, cement, and chemicals, right? So that's very much sort of core for us too. But we also spend time on the circularity of mobility, thinking about how do we get rid of a personal car in cities in particular, and which business models are going to enable that and make money along the way. On the finance side, it's very much software models that enable better supply chain traceability, better analytics, things around ESG, better climate risk analytics, and everything sort of accounting, everything comes in between. And on the externalities, we focus on two in particular: biodiversity, which we believe is going to be an asset class on its own, linking into the biology of the first one, and carbon removals and methane, but that's something we care a lot as well, which again, we see as a, upcoming $1 trillion industry or more that is in a very, very early days. And partially links to biology, partially links to materials, and partially just stand on its own. So I think it gives an idea that, yes, these are 4 areas, but they're interlinked, right? And that's really where our strength is, to look at the intersections between sectors. And we don't like to use the term sector, but system, because we try to take a bigger view. And if you touch this thing here, it's actually going to impact it there. And the technology here is going to be applicable to multiple sectors as well. And that's very much sort of the direction of travel if you really want to mitigate climate change.
So very specific to specific climate use cases around, as you mentioned, transportation, abatement, specific heavy emitting industries. So not necessarily an aversion or proclivity for hard tech, software.
Both.
Seems like more focused on the use case.
Yeah. We are about 50-50 Europe, North America. We're about 50-50 hardware, software. This is not hard coded anywhere, but that's where we are. Though we are a European firm at heart in a way, right? When we invest in North American companies, it's because we help them come to Europe and come to our networks. Not necessarily, we don't necessarily have like a domestic view in places outside of Europe. In particular, around sort of the technologies, the hardware side, there's so much innovation in the US. Europe is really, really behind still.
Yep.
That might change, but the problem is that, if you're a young entrepreneur sitting in Switzerland or, in Germany less so, but you have kind of the system against you, right? Which is the exact opposite of what you have in North America. So it's much, much harder for these young founders there.
Yeah, I talk about that a lot. What President Macron did in France, right, removing some of the tax burdens around, options granting for startups and those sorts of things. Germany is still severely lacking behind. How do you think about, greater Europe, and you look at the kind of primary venture markets? France was much, much smaller 24 months ago than it is today. Government steps in, creates some system level change, to borrow your term. And now we see a rapid increase in venture funding and, of course, entrepreneurs that come on the back of that. Where do you see the hotspots today in the European markets in sort of the broader climate venture space, and where do you think it'll go next?
I mean, there's so much going on in the UK, right? And I think that, look, there are some policy tailwinds here. They've always been very supportive of the startup environment. If there's also the financial capital of Europe, and you could argue that that's changing, but there's a lot going on in the UK. So I think that's still kind of our primary focus. What's lovely now is that the UK is opening up, right? They've now dropped all COVID restrictions. And I don't know about you, Irena, but I've been going to events in person at least twice a week. I think my biggest restriction is my 1-year-old at home. Otherwise, I'd be out a lot more.
In terms of the funding stages when Systemic Capital gets involved, here's what Georgina has to say.
We go in at Series A. We may go a little bit earlier. We may go a little bit later. But Series A is really our sweet spot. I think that's actually been one of our learnings, that when we started investing, we were doing seed and Series A. And what we found is that we're a lot more helpful at Series A. And the reason why we're a lot more helpful at Series A is once product market fit has been established, it's the right time for us to introduce those companies to our networks, both within Systemic and outside. And Systemic's DNA is very much in the kind of corporate advisory side. So we've really found our sweet spot at that stage.
Here, Irena talks about the firm's typical check size.
So with fund one, we were going up to 2.5 million entry point because it was still a small fund. With the new fund, the one we're just launching, it's 5 to 8 million in a Series A. We can go lower. We can do exception. We can do seed rounds, but there has to be some exceptional team where it kind of fits perfectly the investment thesis we've been looking for, things like that. And we can do a bigger Series Bs occasionally, maybe up to 10 million.
Got it. Makes sense. And you were investing off balance sheet in the previous model. In the new model, are you now raising third-party capital as well, or how is that evolving?
The first fund was also third-party capital.
Okay.
It was a balance sheet, a company where 80% of the company is owned by external investors, and they are following us into the next fund. It's primarily, I would say, mission-aligned family offices, global family offices. And now we're bringing institutions as well. So I guess we're taking a step further.
And is there a specific type of investor you like to co-invest with primarily? Do you have a sort of a roster of folks that you collaborate with heavily, or how do you think about that piece?
Yes. So climate tech funds are still a rare breed, right? Early stage, right? Late stage, there's as much as you want, but early stage, it's still a rare breed. You have people that focus on, the food, and, have another one that will do carbon removal, and you have somebody else that is going to do, something else, biotech or So we are a bit unique in going across, right? So we can feed into different people, but there's people we like to work with. In Europe, there's 3-4 funds we like to work with in Europe. There's 3-4 funds we like to work with in the US. We absolutely love the work that Breakthrough Engine Ventures is doing, though, they only do hardware, we do software too. But I think that kind of, system change, they do that too, right?
And maybe just to explain that, why we're able to kind of work across different systems. So we're a small team, as are, most emerging climate tech funds. We're a team of 6 and adding a 7th person. But we have almost 400 people at Systemic Limited, which is this advisory and think tank company. And that's really amazing, right? Because we have, at the very least, 30 experts working in every single system that we focus on. And so that really, really allows us to leverage our knowledge and our networks in that space. And it allows us to be a multi-specialist in a way that a lot of other climate tech firms or investment firms are not.
And we also like to allow our families to come in, right? And now it's going to be also more institutional because a lot of them are very mission driven and they will have their own thing. They have the family that really wants to do nature and the other one that really wants to do transport. And they often have underlying businesses that can then act as first customer or, whatever, second, third customer for these companies. And so allowing and choosing and curating who to bring in into deals, it's another impact amplification, which is kind of what we stand for, right? So we don't see LPs just some kind of, source of money and goodbye, right? They are very, very actively involved in everything we do. And we really want to continue that into fund 2.
Yeah. You'll notice a big theme for us is networks. And we spend a lot of time curating the right networks to then plug our investments into.
Yeah.
No, I think it's brilliant. I think the sort of well-trodden and I think just frankly kind of bullshit, especially software VC approach of like, I'm going to help you staff your executive team. I'm going to help you with recruiting. I'm going to help you with technology.
And that's exactly the thing we say, people, we can't help you, operationally.
Yeah, it's crazy. Like, how do you do that unless you're full-time in the business? Like, and also those services are commodities. You can buy them off the market.
I think that they are funds, the big funds of the West Coast. They do it brilliantly, right? But yeah, maybe you have 5 people that do that and everybody else promises a lot. But we're not on the operational high side of things, right? We really help people, give them a broader platform from where to succeed. And that's our differentiation.
Well, that's what I was saying. That's why I think the approach is so spot on, because that's what I ask my investors for. As I tell them every time, there's 3 things we need reliably from our investors. And it's, of course, capital, that's a given, right? But it's network and insight. And to your point on the research piece, as an early stage company, I can't go deploy 30 people of scientists and analysts. It's a very specific type of person, and it doesn't yield immediate dollar returns, but it's critical. You got to have that information to form the right go-to-markets and investments and those sorts of things. So yeah, I think it's a brilliant move. If you've had the chance to listen to our very first episode, I made the silly mistake of asking our guest, Victoria Beasley of Prelude Ventures, to talk about her favorite investment. Tell me about some of just your best investments. Love to hear a little bit about those.
Yeah. I'm not going to be able to pick bad favorites. It's like picking
Okay,
children.
all right, fine. That's true. That was a very unfair question. I should have known better. So this time I was smarter, and I just asked about companies Georgina and Irena wanted to highlight.
So we were the first institutional investor in ZeroAvia.
Oh, really?
We had known Val from his previous company, which he then, instead of raising capital, he sold to NL.
Irena is talking about the founder and CEO of ZeroAvia, Valery Miftakov.
And then sweated his few years there, as they were destroying the company.
That's not a thing corporates do.
No.
They don't. No.
Only sometimes. And then he came to us. I think it was literally my first week at SYSTEMIQ. And then he was like, look, I want to decarbonize aviation. And I've been doing research for the past, whatever it was, 6-9 months. And I think hydrogen is the route. And will you help me? And that was it. It was still very early days. It was an idea. So what we did, we first gave him a team of people, of systemic people. And then those were, deep Trump years. It was very difficult to get funding on something like that in the US. And in California, there was, I guess, a lot of competition. So the view was, let's try Europe. And so we essentially spent whatever it was, 6-9 months with Val. He was flying over from the US. And then we built an ecosystem right here. Primarily, we spotted that the UK and Norway were the big places to go, which then led to a grant and a second grant from the UK government, so much that ZeroAvia is now a British American company, it's not just an American company. So that really sort of was the beginning of that. Then 2 of our people stayed at ZeroAvia. One is now the CFO, and the other one deals with all the sort of grant side of things. And then we, at that time, after about 6 or 9 months, it was very early, but we had de-risked it in a way because we realized, okay, this is going to be a huge market and this is an amazing team. And then we started investing, and then we sort of been following ever since. And ZeroAvia is on an amazing path. It's incredible. When we invested in ZeroAvia, the idea that hydrogen would become a mainstream thing in aviation was crazy, right? That was just not a thing that anyone talked about. You had this crazy idea about hybrid planes, which we always thought were. But via the Energy Transitions Commission, there was this whole work on aviation, which had underlined that actually hydrogen does have a place, right? Not so much long haul, but in the mid haul sort of. And yeah, and 4 years on, there's no company in the world that doesn't have a hydrogen program. And there's no airport in the world that doesn't have some kind of pilot around hydrogen, right? So it's only 4 years. And sometimes you have to pinch yourself, right? That it has happened so fast. But by now, there's no way back. Because the alternative for airlines is to go to synthetic aviation fuels, which are a derivative of hydrogen, right? And derivatives are always more expensive than the primary input. And so they have a very economic interest to push hydrogen as opposed to the synthetic ones.
Fascinating. I didn't realize you were so early into it. I don't know that team at all, but I ever since I saw the first video of it was like one of the maiden flights where they had the medium haul or short haul flight going. It was like mind blown. So cool. So I've been following him closely since.
Yeah, and the crazy thing is that Val drives most of those pilot planes, right? So he's the founder.
Oh wow. Okay.
He's the pilot. So it's very, hands-on.
ZeroAvia is based in Hollister in the Bay Area and also in the Cotswolds just outside of London.
The 19-seater is being funded by the UK government.
Wow. Okay. Fascinating.
Right. So they're the poster child. They went on stage with Boris Johnson. They're the poster child for this Californian company that comes to the UK.
I don't know what would be the more interesting story, getting the first zero carbon plane funded or being on stage with Boris Johnson. I think that both of those would probably be equally
I hope the
entertaining.
first. But anyway.
Another company Systemic Capital has invested in is Nautilus Labs, a company that advances the efficiency of ocean commerce through AI. It was Systemic Capital's first Series B investment. You're tracking all of these really exciting spaces, but what's one that you would consider more emerging? Maybe a specific area of technology, a specific area of policy that might have market impact, but what's some of the exciting emerging stuff that isn't quite mainstream out there yet? Of course, you don't want to give away your secrets. You're still investors. You still have to go create return, but maybe share it to the extent that you can, some that are exciting.
I am super excited about the removal space, right? There's a lot of focus on carbon now, but methane is the low-hanging fruit that we should really be tackling first. But there are no real technologies today, that can do it at scale. So that's something we're tracking. If you look at removals, the most conservative estimates out there is that by 2050, we'll have to remove 10 billion tons of CO2 per year, which is twice the entire output of the oil and gas industry annual today, right? And, Charm Industry, which is one of our companies, I think has removed the most in the history, right? And they are still at some, whatever they are, 10,000 or something. So you have to create an industry from scratch. And we don't believe that corporates are set up, right, to innovate within. So that innovation will have to come from, tens of super, super exciting companies that have all the potential to become incredibly successful using different routes, right? Some are more mechanical, some are chemical, some are biological, right? Everything, we need everything. Some are more natural, though, I guess we would look more like nature plus as opposed to just planting trees. But that's a space we are super, super excited about.
I think the role that biology is going to play in this space is going to become more and more important. The role of biology in recycling, in bioprocessing, in meat alternatives. So I think that's one that we're tracking as well.
And lastly, Georgina shares what they're looking for when they invest.
Ultimately, the reason why we're multi-specialists is because the most important thing for us is to find outstanding entrepreneurs, right? We're investing in tail end events. We need to believe that the team behind is going to be able to solve the impossible. So that's the talent that we're looking for. And I always say this, right? At Series A, 80% of it is team, 20% of it is market. And maybe I should say 19%, and then 1% is everything else. So it's really about those outstanding founders out there.
That's right. Team, market, and product. And each stage has to be weighed significantly differently. Yeah. A big thank you both for the time and your thoughts. I always enjoy our discussions, and you have amazing passion and energy every time. And every time we sit, I get to learn something new from you guys. So thanks again, and really enjoyed having you guys on, and maybe we'll do it again.
Well, thanks so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
I hope you learned as much as I did from my conversation with Georgina and Irena. Head on over to systemiccapital.earth if you want to learn more about their work, or if you want to reach out. We'll put the link in our show notes as well. Before we go, please don't forget to subscribe to ClimateTech with Kentaro on Apple Podcasts or whatever platform you listen on. Thank you all for listening, and I'll catch you on our next episode. ClimateTech with Kentaro is produced by our incredible team at Persefoni and Hueman Group Media. Our theme music is by Guest House. And if you want to learn more about Persefoni and our climate management and accounting platform, please visit our website at persefoni.com.